Okay, let's start with motivation, refuge. So sit comfortably wherever you are. Visualize yourself surrounded by all kind mother sentient beings, or who are trapped in the oceans of samsaric suffering, like oneself, taking rebirth through the force of karma and delusions without control since beginningless time until the present. But now we're so fortunate to have met the Buddha Dharma, which teaches a clear path free from suffering of this life, future lives, and samsara. But this opportunity won't last long. Death is certain to come, and the time of death is uncertain. But at the time of death, only our Dharma practice is a benefit to us. So we need to practice now and use our lives to benefit all sentient beings. So let's try to relate your motivation to this session. And then if you like, generate the mind of refuge, visualizing the refuge field in the space before you, and then generating mind of concern about the suffering of samsara and faith in the Buddha Dharma Sangha to protect us and all such beings from suffering of samsara. Okay, so then we can start. Okay, so today's topic is chanting and mantras in general. I don't have so much to say about today, so I hope you all have some questions. But generally, I found in the years I've been leading courses and sessions at CKSL, there are a lot of questions about mantras and chanting because it's something very popular and very much part of Indian culture. And there's a lot of confusion also about how it works, what are the possible benefits, and so forth. So I expect there's some questions about it. Yeah, chanting and mantras. Well, you know, from the past sessions, I usually like to start from a general kind of human perspective. So if we think about, you know, chanting is what is chanting? It's basically where we use words to say things with a tune, right? In a musical way. So why is chanting like different from ordinary just saying stuff? I think it's because, you know, sounds affect our minds very much. That's why, you know, as humans, we love music so much. You know, in every culture, people love music. You know, it's something people are very passionate about. People like to spend a lot of time listening because it makes them feel good in different ways. And not only feel good in a trivial way, like make you feel happy, but I think different sounds, different kinds of music, they relate to all our different emotions. You know, there's some kinds of music when we feel sad, we love to listen to because we feel like um, maybe the people who composed that music or wrote that sad music, like the blues in the US, very popular, that they can relate, that they felt something of what I'm feeling, you know, and that so you can connect with those people, whether they lived, you know, 1,000 years ago or whether they are alive today, through that sounds, the sounds of that music, or whether you're feeling maybe elated, there's sounds of that. If you're feeling in love, there's a lot of music related to being in love. If you're afraid, you know, there's music related to being afraid. So I think different sounds, sounds just like the tone of a person's voice, they can express a lot more than what the words are that they're saying. Like that, you know, different tones, melodies, um, different kinds of sounds strung together. They very much somehow tune into and relate to what we're feeling. They can be an expression of what we're feeling, or they can make us feel a certain way by, you know, understanding the way another person's feeling by a kind of sounds they're making. So chanting is related to all of that, right? It's a way of combining using words that themselves have a meaning with a certain melodies and tones and sounds that also carry a meaning. So when you put the two together, it becomes extremely powerful. So for me, I think in my experience, one of the best examples of that is like Lama Chopa puja in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. It has some of the most beautiful melodies and variety of melodies, and the words of the sadhana, the words of the ritual are also extremely profound. So, I'm fortunate enough to know Tibetan. I've studied Tibetan for a while. So especially I find, when you put together the beautiful chanting of Lama Chopa together with understanding the meaning of the words, and if you can focus your mind a little bit during, a nice group practice of Lama Chopa, it's incredibly powerful kind of thing to be able to bring those two dynamics together, reflecting on the meaning of some profound words together with the mind being moved by the sound of the chanting, of the music of the chanting. Yeah, so that's why I think it's important actually to, to have chanting in, I grew up in the Roman Catholic tradition, and there was also very beautiful like tunes for hymns, beautiful hymns. So I think in any religion, that's kind of part of the practice of the religion. An important practice is combining musicality with the words that express the meanings of that religious practice. It's very powerful for the mind, and it's kind of a universal human phenomena that we have that, at least in religious traditions. But it's like for us who are practicing Buddhism in English, not necessarily in the West, because there's people in India also and other countries who mostly engage with Buddhism through the medium of English. It's something that's lacking in a big way because Buddhism is new to the English-speaking world, and there haven't been generations of, Buddhist masters who are both scholars and great yogis, meditators, and great poets. So there hasn't developed yet the body of prayers and kind of sadhanas and rituals that are set to different melodies that move the mind. So it's something, we need to work on. Definitely there have been some, and most translators, when they translate things in verse, like prayers and things in verse that are in verse in Tibetan, when they translate to English, they don't translate it in meter, right? They remove the meter. So they just put, because it's a lot easier. I mean, I know as a translator, they just put, the words that are the translation of one line in one line, and then the words, the translation of the next line, the next line. So the lines are there, but there's no meter, right? So it's just like prose broken up into lines by, and enter by the return key, which is not poetry anymore. I mean, the words can still be poetic to some degree, but you can't chant them anymore. But there have been some very, noteworthy and praiseworthy attempts to translate different prayers in a way that's chantable, like the 21 Taras. I think Martin Wilson did that maybe. And then there's some other ritual works. I think there's a praise to, what is it? There's a really nice one. Yeah, not Mahakala. There's a praise to Mahakala. It's chantable. Anyway, there's some things that are chantable. I think the Vajrayogini Sadhana, also some people worked on, but I don't know the tunes for that. But anyway, there's some, but Lama Chopa, you can see, you do it, I mean, for even people who speak English, you do it in Tibetan with a big group, and it's incredibly moving. Even you're just reading the English words and listening to the tunes. But you just read it in English with a group, it still can be moving because the words are so profound, but it's not the same as chanting it. One of the best things I was thinking that I think CKSL has done over the years is to mainly headed up by Dipti, but with help from others, is to kind of start the tradition of chanting the Heart Sutra in Sanskrit. So at CKSL, they do it occasionally, and then Dipti went to Bodh Gaya and taught the students at the Maitri school, and then they performed it for His Holiness. Performed. I mean, it's a little strange to say perform the Heart Sutra. They chanted the Heart Sutra at a teaching for His Holiness. His Holiness was so moved by it that he had them come and do it again and again. Basically, every time he's in Bodh Gaya, he has them come do it. And I was also very moved when I first saw the students, especially chanted, because the feeling that you get from hearing the Heart Sutra chanted in Sanskrit is so different than in Tibetan, especially in English, of course, but even Tibetan, where it even sounds, it sounds okay, it sounds nice, but the feeling you get from hearing it chanted in Sanskrit is completely different. So when I heard that the first time, it really sort of reminded me that, well, I think there's a lot of cultural aspects about how Buddhism must have existed in India and in ancient India, and as expressed through the different Indian languages that we forget about now, and it's kind of lost, and forget about how different it must have been to what we experience in the Tibetan kind of cultural expressions. And I think it's especially important for Indians to remember that, and for kind of current day Indians who are really interested in, not only interested, kind of passionate about Buddhism, to if it's not too much extra hassle, to really try to become familiar with Buddhism a little bit through different Indian languages like Sanskrit and Prakrit, because I think it gives a very different feeling. But that said, I mean, I've been in India for a long time, and engaging in Buddhism with Indian friends for a long time, and I, for me, it's just so much to be able to try to get my head around the whole Tibetan language and Tibetan expression of Buddhism. I haven't had much time or been able to make much effort to become familiar with the sort of Indian cultural expressions of Buddhism so much. But I know I have some friends who, like Geshe Graham, and even after he finishes Geshe studies, has gone on. He's studying Sanskrit now to learn how to translate some texts by Nagarjuna and others. So that's, I admire a lot, but it's difficult to fathom the kind of energy it takes to learn a whole nother language well enough that you can translate. Anyway. So chanting, it's definitely good to spend some time doing and becoming kind of good at, if you're inclined. And it's good sometimes to even do just alone, of course, in groups. If you can chant well, you really can contribute a lot to a small group's practice. I know, from like doing some chanting of different pujas and stuff at different centers. Sometimes, when there's just a few people, then the fewer people there are, then the more responsibility there is on each person to contribute. And it's a sad feeling when it kind of feels like the whole thing is just going to peter out any second, because there's very few people and not many people are really contributing very strongly. It's just not it's kind of a sad thing. So it's kind of, when we're doing a group practice and we're chanting, it's really, we each have a responsibility to contribute the best we can. It really helps the other people in the group to hear each other. You can hear each other's enthusiasm and dedication and sort of concentration and faith. It makes a big difference to the energy of the group, and it can help a lot in people's practice. I know that's one of my favorite things about being in the monastery is, being with a big group of people chanting together. It can really move your mind in a way that you really couldn't get while you're on your own. And you can feel the group energy a lot. I mean, there's some days when just the whole group feels kind of bored and they're just doing the whole thing out of obligation. And then there's sometimes whenever everybody's really happy to be there and really enthusiastic and really chanting well, and it kind of is very inspiring. So that's a bit about chanting. And then about mantra. Yeah, mantras, I mean, mantra is part of the, Mahayana Tantrayana practice, which, to study or practice, you need to have initiation first. So it's not something we speak about so openly. But there's been, there's a lot of information about it already in the public sphere. So can say a few things. Mantra and the use of mantras is something common to both the Hindu and the Buddhist, and the Jain, I don't know, but definitely Hindu and Buddhist traditions in India. Mantra means mind protection. So it's, I guess you know what mantras are, like Om Mani Padme Hum. They're kind of short, usually fairly short strings of different syllables or words that when we recite, they're intended to protect the mind from non-virtue, right? Protect the mind from falling into non-virtuous thoughts. So to keep the mind in a virtuous state, to keep the mind from falling into distraction, to help focus the attention. But how does that work? I guess if I wanted to say anything about mantra, I'd want to encourage people to recognize that from the side of the mantra, there's limited power, right? If we recite a mantra, it's too often, I think we recite mantras thinking that just by doing that, then all kinds of blessings are just going to fall upon us like rain and everything's going to be fine by the force of the mantra, right, from the side of the object. But that's not the case. Like it requires, like Shantideva says in the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, whatever practice you do, if you do with a distracted mind, it'll be very weak, right? There won't be much effect. So whatever practice we're doing, we have to put effort to concentrate our attention, to focus our mind. So it's the same with mantra recitation. If we do so with a distracted mind, it's not going to do much for us. There definitely is some power from the side of the object because the mantras, I'm not sure, well, I can speak in the Buddhist tradition, it's considered that mantras are something taught by different enlightened beings, by different Buddhas. And so, like any speech of the Buddha, it has power because it's spoken by an enlightened being, because it's motivated by, infinite love, loving kindness, compassion, wisdom, and it's an expression of the infinite positive qualities of an enlightened being. So it has power. That's why even you read a sutra, something that's not a mantra, but just like the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, you read the words, or in the Pali Canon, read the words of a sutra, and the words all have like power, to affect our minds in a beneficial way, because it's arising from the power of the being who spoke them, and their power arises from the perfection of the two collections of wisdom and merit, right? So Buddha has completed the two collections of wisdom and merit over 3 countless great eons, equivalent, and therefore everything they say has power. So of course that's the case for mantras. But then in addition, mantras are usually words that are blessed. So the person, the Buddha who taught them or spoke them, has made, dedicated merit, has made strong prayers that whoever says those mantras, that certain benefits accrue to that person. But usually we describe, how is it that a Buddha blesses us or blesses us? Then there's a common analogy used of it being like a ring and a hook, like hooking a ring. If there's a ring like in the ocean, like, I don't know, does that make sense, that analogy? Well, imagine it's a plastic ring, I guess, in the ocean. A wooden ring, let's say, that's more eco-friendly. Imagine there's a balsamic wooden ring floating around the ocean and you're in a boat and you want to hook it with something. Well, if you just have a pole, and it'll be a straight pole, it'd be very difficult. If you have a pole with a hook on the end, it's kind of easy, right? So usually in this analogy, it's like we're like the ring, we have this potential to be pulled, to be drawn up out of water. And the Buddhas, the Buddha's activity is like a hook, right? So even if the Buddha's activity is there, the hook is there, but there's no ring. It's just like a, a straight thing, a straight piece of wood. You can't hook it, right? So our mind having faith is like shaping our mind into a ring, right? Which the Buddhas can then hook. So it's our faith that actually makes any practice powerful and effective, and enables, not enables is maybe the wrong word, but creates a set of conditions whereby the Buddha's enlightened activity can affect us and can benefit us. I mean, there's always the question, if the Buddhists have perfected generosity and morality and skillful means and benefiting, and the sole objective is to benefit all sentient beings, and they've abandoned every fault and perfected every positive quality, why haven't they already freed all sentient beings from suffering? Why are we still suffering? So the typical answer, you have to check whether you think it's true or not, is that because from our side we haven't done enough, right? The Buddhas are teaching, they're there teaching the causes for suffering and the method to be free from suffering, but from our side we haven't put that teaching into practice enough. But another way to think about it in terms of this analogy is like, yeah, the Buddha's action is there. It's like a hook, kind of continually reaching down into the ocean to draw out things. But there's some things it can hook and some things it can't. So until now, we've been the things that can't be hooked so far. So one of the main ways that we can connect with the Buddha's enlightened activity and inspiration that they provide and guidance they provide is by having interest and by having faith. So that's another way that mantras work, right? Is through the power of faith, having faith that in the being who taught the mantra, having faith in the practice, having faith in the ability of the mantra to work. And then there's stories to support that. There's stories about, by the Tibetans. I don't know about stories from India, but by stories about, people in Tibet who have, even when they were first taught a mantra, they misunderstood, they got the syllables wrong, and they're saying the wrong thing. But because they have total faith that that will benefit them, then the incredible benefit accrues to them. Their minds are transformed by saying that. So, yeah, there's many examples like that. Then there's a famous example of the woman whose son went from Tibet, whose son went to visit like Bodh Gaya or something in India. She asked her son to bring back a relic of the Buddha, and he forgot. And so on the way back along the road, just before he reached home, like he just found a dog's tooth and just picked that up and gave it to his mother and said, "Oh, here, this is a relic I brought from India." his mother didn't know it's just a dog's tooth he found on the road. She thought it's really like the tooth of an enlightened being or a great, Arya being or something. And so she put it on her altar and made prayers to it. But then relics were produced from the tooth as a result of her faith, nothing to do with the dog. So that's a classical story to illustrate that point. But then also, the mantras they are, well, one of my favorite advice, the advice I found most useful is by Jada Rinpoche once when he was talking about this, saying that, the main thing when we're saying mantras, the main thing is to understand the meaning that they express. So every mantra has a meaning, as an expression of some meaning. So always in the commentaries on a practice that involves mantra, there are explanations of the meaning. So he said, the main thing is when you're reciting the mantra to reflect upon the meaning of it, and that definitely protects your mind. There's no question. So like with the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum, the meaning is quite straightforward. It's the jewel in the lotus. Om, invoking the Buddha's, the blessings of the Buddha's body, speech, and mind. Mani, meaning jewel, and here it's a symbol of bodhicitta, great compassion. Padma, lotus, here's the symbol of wisdom, realizing emptiness. Om Mani Padme Hum, Hum meaning so be it. So basically it's meaning, by the blessing of all the Buddhas, may, wisdom and compassion be unified in my mind. So of course, if you reflect on that meaning as you recite the mantra, there's no question your mind is benefited and protected from non-virtuous thoughts and attitudes. And then, then you can add visualizations to that as an expression of that kind of meaning. Yeah, so one, have faith, and then two, reflect on the meaning. And then three, just don't be distracted, right? Focus your attention well. And then in addition to that, I guess you can add the sound. I mean, sound does have power, right? So, but I think the way that the sound of mantras affects us is completely different than the sounds of chanting reflects us. So the sounds of chanting affect us in sort of an emotional way, just like music does. But the way that the sounds of mantra affect us is more subtle. It's more the way that I think that the sound of the mantra, the vibration, the way it affects our kind of winds in our body, the prana or the chi in our body, it affects the winds in certain ways that can be helpful to deepen different positive attitudes. But then there's a danger that they can also disturb the winds in our body such that we get, we have problems, like feel pain or more stress or stuff, so like that. So you have to be careful with the way you use mantras and not force it, especially, not force it too hard, not say too fast, not say too strongly, not say too many or too much in one day. Have to be kind of sensitive to how it's affecting you and be gentle with the way you use them. And then finally, I guess I should say, because with any practice of tantra in the Buddhist tradition, it should be, and this is maybe what makes Buddhist tantra uncommon from other tantric systems, is it should always be based on refuge in the Buddha Dharma Sangha, and on, because it's part of the Mahayana, it should always be based on a bodhicitta motivation, the motivation to benefit all sentient beings, an altruistic motivation, and for that purpose, to oneself become enlightened as quickly as possible. And it should be based on renunciation, not being attached, so the opposite to attachment to the pleasures of this life, but seeing that, pleasures of the senses and the eight worldly concerns, they can never bring lasting well-being and satisfaction. So so a mind that is detached from or sort of relinquishes attachment to selfish concerns and selfish pleasures. So renunciation, and then bodhicitta, I already mentioned. And then finally, it should be based on some understanding of emptiness and dependent arising, right? Seeing that all things arise interdependently upon different parts, causes and conditions, and upon the mind that imputes, then they're empty of existing from their own side or by their own force, or independently from their own side alone. So so whenever we're using mantras, we should remember those, renunciation, bodhicitta, and wisdom of emptiness, along with refuge in the Buddha Dharma Sangha. So the practice should always be based upon those. Otherwise, there's a danger that it becomes just a worldly activity, which may bring some benefit in this life, but in future lives, it won't help us be free from suffering at all. Okay, so I thought I didn't have much to say, but here we are. Half our time is gone. So I hope you have some questions now.
So, Venerable, there was one question in the chat, maybe.
Yeah, I was just remembering that.
I had some, but maybe we could take one before in the chat. So the person says that you mentioned Lama Chopa, if one does it without chanting, just silent reading, does it still have the same effect or merit?
I don't know. It's hard to compare. I mean, there's different kinds of effects that can come I mean, like in the daily practice, I usually don't chant it. I usually I'm kind of lazy, so I should just quietly read it. Also, and it can, I mean, even then, it can, I think when you quietly read it, how much effect it has on us, or how much merit, accrues from it, mainly has to do with, how well your mind is focused on it, how much time you spend kind of generating the different attitudes expressed in your mind. Um, yeah, if we do it, the more distracted we are, not really paying attention, of course, the less effect, the less merit. The more we're focused and we kind of more deeply generate, the attitude of refuge, attitude of compassion, attitude of, faith, the make offerings extensively, sincerely confess, make prostrations. The more kind of time we spend, and the more strongly we do each of those practices in our mind, of course, the more effect it has, the more merit it has. So I think chanting is just kind of one more tool to help us deepen our practice of it. I know, like one time when I had to lead, well, I was kind of co-leader of a retreat, the pre-ordination course in Dharamsala with Geshe Namdak, and it was one of my responsibilities was going to be lead Lama Chopa chanting every morning, and I had forgotten a lot of the tunes, so I spent a couple weeks on my own before the thing started, and every morning I would just chant Lama Chopa by myself, and I was kind of surprised how much more powerful it is, even you're just on your own. But if you really take the time to do the tunes, chant it slowly, it is a lot more powerful. There's no question. You're spending a lot more time, and the melodies, have influence. So I think naturally it tends to have a stronger effect. And if that's the case, then probably you're creating more merit too, if you do with the tunes. But so I would suggest, if you, maybe it's advice to myself. You don't have to do a course every day, but sometimes, maybe on the weekend or on a holiday when you have more time, it's kind of nice to do. Just chant it, or part of it yourself. Okay, Marianne.
My question, thank you, Venerable. My question is about visualizing mantras. So in the sadhanas, you know what the mantra looks like, and you know what the seed syllable looks like because you've been taught that. But recently, I've been attending a Lamrim meditation, and this leader talks not just about visualizing Shakyamuni Buddha, but also the seed syllable and the mantra. And I realized I don't know what the syllable mum looks like, and so I asked, what does that look like? And we couldn't find an example of it. Finally, I found one on the internet, but then I'm not sure, if that's,
Mum, you're saying?
when you pull it off the
I don't know the
yeah,
seed syllable of Shakyamuni, but
yeah. So how
MUM.
important to visualize the mantra syllables, the encircle your heart in Sanskrit, how, because you want your visualizations to be clear, you want them to be vivid.
I mean, when I've heard this question asked to my teachers or other lamas, every time I've heard them say it's not important to visualize it in Sanskrit or Tibetan. I mean, first of all, like, yeah, the mantras all come from Sanskrit, and I don't know any Tibetan who visualizes Sanskrit. They all visualize the Tibetan, right? The Tibetan way of writing, like Om Mani Padme Hum. Um, so every lama I've heard say is every lama I've heard answer this question say it's fine to just visualize it in Rome, what is it, Roman alphabet, in whatever language you're doing it in, you can visualize it in your own language, I think. But it is different. I mean, because like you think Om, in the way they write it in Tibetan, it's just one letter, so it's one shape. But OM is two letters, right? So it's a little different to visualize it. But with the mantras going, the garland of mantras around the edge of them, that's the same pretty much. But when it's the seed syllable, it's just one letter. It's different. But then, you know, some practices, the seed syllable for deity is 2 letters, even in Tibetan, right? So it's not, I think a lot of times we get hung up too much on some details of the Tantra. Things are quite flexible, actually, and we have to make our minds flexible like that. But I think that the importance, though, I don't know, I'm not sure I'm so clear on your question, but because like when we're visualizing the merit field or the refuge field, I've never heard of the importance of visualizing the seed syllables and mantras in that case. It's usually when we're meditating on doing the self-generation, then it's most important.
It's in
And
the
sometimes
Chanting.
with Vajrasattva, if you're visual, you know, Vajrasattva, yeah, you want to, I think you visualize the mantra in the deity's heart. But you know, like Lama Yeshe, I was just reading a commentary by Lama Yeshe today, and he always makes the point, like, just do the best you can, and that's fine. Don't worry. Don't get stressed about doing it, you know, in exactly the way it's described in the commentary. That's always kind of like optionally, you know, you can do it like this, but we have to work towards that gradually.
Thank you. The second half of my question is about the scripts that are different. There's one that's very flowy and one that's very block, like there's a row of prayer wheels in Namche Bazaar on your way up to Laudo, and they're all the flowy kind of mantras that are around the things that you spin, and then one of them is not. One of them in the middle is very blocky and different. Is there different meanings for different scripts?
Probably, but I have no idea. I don't really know anything about scripts. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, there's another question in the chat. Why do Tibetan teachers who speak English still do prayers in Tibetan when the students are all English speakers and don't know Tibetan? I mean, we're each kind of attached to our own language, aren't we? That's my only answer. I don't know. I mean, I can imagine, you know, if you grew up like doing always prayers in one way, all your teachers do them in that way, all your friends have done them that way, you've always done them in that way. It's difficult to change and do them in a different way. Yeah. I mean, there's one story which maybe, I don't know, maybe contributes to some kind of explanation. One of my teachers here at Sarah, he told me this, well, I won't tell the story, the whole story in detail, but generally like it goes like this. Milarepa, after Milarepa had achieved enlightenment in Tibet, then let's see, and Padmasambhava, who's just one of the last great Indian Mahasiddhas, he came to Tibet to teach. And Milarepa wanted to test Padmasambhava's level of realization. So he shrunk himself to just the size of like a flea and sat on a blade of grass by the side of the path as Padmasambhava was, not Padmasambhava, sorry. I got the wrong person. Padmasambhava is person who taught the 100 pieces of advice to the people of Tingri. Padampa Sangye. Not Padmasambhava is Guru Rinpoche, not Padmasambhava. Padampa Sangye. Padampa Sangye is one of the last great Mahasiddhas of India, ancient India. So Padampa Sangye, right? The most famous text by him that remains is 100 pieces of advice to the people of Tingri. It's very profound, pithy kind of advice. Anyway, so Padampa Sangye was coming to Tibet, and Milarepa wanted to test his level of realization. So he shrunk himself, you know, by his miraculous power, shrunk himself to the size of like, you know, maybe a ladybug is better than a flea, and sat on a blade of grass by the side of the path. But Padampa Sangye, you know, by his, you know, power of his mind, he realized that Milarepa was sitting there. And so he also shrunk himself and sat on another blade of grass next to Milarepa. But then it said, so my teacher, this is the interesting part. My teacher said, Milarepa's blade of grass kind of bent down. So Padampa Sangye was sitting higher. And So my teacher, Counselor Rinpoche, he told the story. He's saying the level of realization was the same. They're both fully enlightened. But the reason Milarepa's blade of grass bent down was because he practiced in Tibetan, whereas Padamba Sangye had practiced in Sanskrit, and Sanskrit language carries greater blessing. So I don't know. So I imagine probably Tibetan teachers feel like Tibetan carries greater blessing than English, and it's better to do Tibetan. I mean, in a way, there's something to that because, think about Lama Chopa. Like it's composed by, of course, it's based on, Lama Chopa. Well, yeah, it's based on Indian, the Guru Puja. I don't think it's composed in English, in Sanskrit, though. I think it's composed by Panchen Chökyi Gyaltsen in Tibetan. Or like the Song of the Spring Queen is one of the other prayers we do. That's composed by Lama Tsongkhapa through a vision that he had this pure vision of dakinis in the sky singing that song, and that's where it came from. So in a way, it's not composed by Tsongkhapa, it's composed by dakinis in a pure kind of land, in a pure sphere. And then Lama Tsongkhapa heard it and he wrote it down. But so were those Tibetan dakinis? They sung Tibetan as opposed to Sanskrit? I don't know, because it's definitely not, there's no Sanskrit version of that. It's composed by Tsongkhapa. But it does make you think, well, if you sing it in the language in which it was bestowed, probably carries more blessing than if you sing it in English, the language into which it was translated by just some, random translator who doesn't probably have any level of realization.
May I say something? I once asked my teacher, the current Tree Rinpoche, I say, like, there are some part of the sadhana where it describes a visualization. So I say, if I just visualize and not have to say all the words, is that okay? And he said, actually, the visualization is more important, and so it is okay. But then he added, the words that some guru in the past wrote those sadhana, and so therefore those were the words of the gurus and carry the blessing of the guru. And so it's good to say the words for that reason. Mm-hmm. But what I didn't get to ask him, the follow-up question was that the sadhana that I say is translated into English. So does it still carry the same blessing if those were like the guru's words has blessing? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. In short, I mean, I don't have a blessing measure to use, and my mind's not subtle enough to, by any means to know that. I mean, to know like how much blessing, something carries requires an incredible, to really know, requires an experiential, something. So I don't know, in short.
Another thing I always have some doubt is more regarding mantra, but maybe to a lesser extent towards prayers when it needed to be said in either Tibetan or Sanskrit or anything like that. It almost gives me the idea that there's something inherent in the sound or the word itself when there is that insistence. But then, of course,
what insistence? When there's insistence?
I mean, so if they insist on it being said in Tibetan or Sanskrit or in mantra in Sanskrit, yeah. So, or the whole idea of mantra, it almost gives a connotation of there's something inherent in those words, in those characters. Especially when we start talking about seed syllabus or syllable of particular deity and whatever not. But the thing is that, being trained in the Prasangika system, nothing is inherent. So I sometimes feel a little bit of contradiction there.
That's no problem. I mean, just because like fire is hot, no? In a way you can say that's an inherent property of fire, just because that's what it is. I mean, it's hot and burning. That's always going to be a quality of fire, but that doesn't mean fire exists from its own side. It still depends upon causes and conditions and parts and, mental imputation. That's no problem. But
So what is the causes and condition that makes mantra powerful? again?
Oh, the blessed, well, the realization of the Buddhas who taught it. So everything that they've done to become enlightened all becomes a power of that mantra, having any power. You know, each practice of generosity, each practice of, you know, meditating on emptiness, and then their motivation to teach that. Then they're actually teaching it, and then, you know, then a mantra is a sound. It's changing moment by moment. There's all those, you know, there's different aspects of it being independent and arising. The mantra is made up of different parts, each syllable, and then each part of each syllable. Right. So there's all different things that have, you know, causes and conditions that have come together for a mantra to exist. But it's true. We always say the mantras. We don't translate the mantras into, like in Tibetan, you don't translate the mantra into Tibetan and say the Tibetan of it. We do always say it in Sanskrit. I think it's, yeah, certain sounds, like this is what I was saying, the certain sounds affect like our subtle winds in different ways. So I think that's probably why it's important to use the same sound, like, and not because if you translate it in a different language, it has a completely different sound. But with like a sutra, like the Perfection of the Heart Sutra, for example, I think the main thing is the meaning, not the sound of the words. So I think the meaning still carries power and the blessing of the Buddha, no matter what language it's translated into. I mean, it's interesting, like think about, this is also related. We talk about, you know, receiving the lung. It's big in the Tibetan tradition, receiving the lung of which means receiving the oral transmission. So imagine like the Shakyamuni Buddha first spoke the Heart Sutra on Vulture's Peak, you know, 2,500 plus years ago. That's the first time it was spoken. And it was spoken out of his realization of emptiness to a group of, you know, to an audience of, ordained people and bodhisattvas. And then, you know, some among the audience, they also developed insight in the meaning of the sutra, and they taught to their students. And then those students taught to their students, and on and on and on, down to the present day, right? So ostensibly, there's an unbroken oral transmission of the Heart Sutra from 2,500 years ago until the present day, right? It's quite amazing when we think about it. We don't just think about it, but that's what it means. So when, you know, His Holiness Dalai Lama gives the transmission of the Heart Sutra to an audience, he's received that transmission from his teachers in an unbroken chain back to Shakyamuni Buddha, and he's conveying that to us, to his, you know, to the audience. But then there's a question, well, but he's speaking it in Tibetan, right? So one of my friends here at the monastery asked me one time, what if, you know, because he knows Chinese, I think, and someone was asking him to give the transmission of the Heart Sutra. So if I give the transmission of the Heart Sutra in Chinese, do you think the people get it? Do they receive it? Because it's a different language, but you're changing it. But then I thought anyway, I told him, well, if they can't receive it in Chinese, then you don't have the transmission because you receive it in Tibetan. And the Buddha didn't
Because
speak it in
Buddha
Tibetan.
didn't first teach it in Tibetan.
Buddha didn't speak Tibetan. Tibetan, I don't even know if it existed then. So yeah, I think so that way you look, so it seems like that in the oral transmission, the oral transmission being passed from generation to generation doesn't depend so much on the exact words. It depends upon the meaning being expressed in whatever the language is used.
Talking again about blessing and merit.
Hold on, B, maybe you should give some others a chance here, though. There might be some more bashful in the audience.
Venerable, may I ask something?
Please, yeah.
Venerable, I've been checking the Lama Yeshe website, Lama Super Rinpoche website, and there's mantras there. And there are mantras where he writes, you know, like just by seeing this mantra, your karma of eons is cleansed. And I mean, I always wonder why it's written, because I don't have an answer. And why would he lie? You just believe him. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, of course, I mean, there's no lying. I mean, nobody's lying.
Sorry. I mean, yeah.
I mean, Lama Zopa Rinpoche is saying that because it's written in the Kangyur, and the collected in different sutras and different works of the Buddha. It's written there about those mantras, and so Rinpoche is just repeating that. He has total faith that that is the case. But yeah, you see that in many instances, like in the Sangata Sutra, in the Sutra of Golden Light, in the Vajra Cutter, Diamond Cutter Sutra. It'll say, you know, by reciting this, by reading it, by merely holding it, merely reciting one line, copying it, you know, reflecting on it, just such and such benefits, you know, accrue to, you know, amazing benefits accrue to the person. Yeah, I asked Rinpoche about that once too. Actually, I wrote an article, kind of extensive article about that called "How Do Holy Objects Work," which I think you can find online somewhere probably. How do holy objects work? Where I went through different explanations of that main question, but the main thing Rinpoche said when I asked him that time was basically it's through the power of Buddha's prayer, right? So when a person becomes light and they perfect these 10 powers, one of them is the power of prayer. So what it means is basically an enlightened person has acquired an incredible amount of spiritual energy, is one way to put it, but you know, a merit and wisdom, which are very powerful things. And then they direct that by means of their intention that, you know, whoever sees this by the power of that, you know, by the power of my collection of merit and my qualities of wisdom and so forth, then, you know, if it's true, I actually have those. Or sometimes by the power of truth, other times by the power of merit, wisdom, their collection, two collections. Then whoever just sees this, may that become a condition for them to purify, you know, the eons of, you know, karma, negative karma. So yeah, so then from the power of the object, there is kind of that there. But then, like I was saying, we also need something from our side to contribute, to make a connection between the two. I mean, you have to do some kind of thought experiments. Is there any case we can think of where we generate a certain intention towards a certain object, and that seems to imbue it with some kind of power? You know? Can you think of an example?
I mean, just
Just on a super small scale, right?
Yeah. I mean, if the word mom didn't mean anything, it would just be another word. But there's a meaning attached to that mom, which makes it very precious.
Right, exactly. That's a good. So if we use that word mom in a kind of inappropriate way, it's something very destructive, right? There's nothing from the side of that sound. It's because we imbue it with a certain meaning. Then it does have power. That's a good example. Yeah. Another example? Any others? I saw you nodding your head, Mary Ellen. You have an example too. I was thinking of the example of a gift. You know, think of like, you know, like one person's mother gives them a gift of I don't know, a spoon or something, and then they buy the same spoon they just have bought somewhere. Like, they're different, right? They're the same. Might be the object seems the same, but one's been given by someone who loves you a lot, another you just picked up or, you know, found or something like that. So it's like the object. I think the power of the object is a little different. Because, like, I mean, it goes back to kind of B's comment about, you know, the Prasangika view, and it kind of works here. Like, things don't have any inherent existence. So everything that interacts with that object, it transforms the object on some level, somehow. So if you know, analyze the two spoons in a microscope, you're not going to find anything different about them, I don't think. But still, it would seem that, you know, the object has a different effect because of the way it's been affected by other things. I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting to see, to think about. I mean, it might help. I find it helpful to look at some of these studies about, like, related to different psi phenomena. doing double blind experiments of, having people in different rooms, and one of them like flipping over a random set of cards with objects on it, another person in another room, trying to tune into that person's mind and guess which card they're looking at any given moment. And, that's just an example. There's many different varieties of the same thing, but there's huge body of evidence that, one person's mind does affect another person's mind. So like that one, the chances that the person's going to guess what the other person is looking at are greater than 50% in almost every case. So how is that? What's going on? Like, how is that working? Or just the experiment of just sending thought. One person in one room, another person in another room. They don't know each other, or they just met, and one person just thinks about anything, and the other person just tries to guess what they're thinking about. You can even do this experiment like Rupert Sheldrake, this interesting scientist from England. He has a cool, I don't know if it still exists, but he used to have this really cool website where you can like with friends, you can log on and do different experiments with each other. So if you have 3 friends, each of you have a phone, you can like, I forget how it was. He has a program, so you can all call up into this. You call into the server, and then the server, one person's chosen. Anyway, one person will receive like a message that they should think about this or something, and then the other 2, they receive like at the same time a question, like what is that person thinking about? Just roughly, I don't remember exactly. I once did with some of the monks here in the house, but so you do these experiments where can the other 2 people think? Can they perceive like what you're thinking about, like either A or B? If you just have to be thinking about one thing or another, like or yes or no or something like that, can they perceive like what the third person is thinking about? So yeah, he's trying to build up a big data set, but I forget. There's another famous experimenter in the U.S. who's also done a lot of these experiments with randomized number generator. I don't remember his name right now, but anyway, there's a whole body of evidence for our thoughts and intentions affecting inanimate objects. It's long and short of it. So mantras are inanimate objects, and the point here is that a powerful person's mind, a person's mind is powerful, can powerfully affect that inanimate object so that it has a certain effect on other people who come into contact with it. Okay, we should stop here, no? So time is up.
Yes, Venerable. There was a question in the chat. Maybe we could take it up next week if it's okay.
Sure. Okay, yeah, we should stop. But can you remember it? I won't.
I will write it down, Venerable. I don't know if the same person will come, Bharat Sima, but I will write it down and I will share the audio.
Okay. Can you try to remember for next week? Okay, so let's dedicate. Think of all the merit we've created together. This discussion. And rejoice in the merit created by all other sentient beings and all of the other enlightened beings, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And rejoice. So by the force of all this merit gathered together, may all sentient beings be freed from every form of suffering, especially all those who've taken rebirth in lower realms as animals, hell beings, hungry ghosts. May they quickly be freed from that state and take a precious human rebirth or rebirth in a pure land. And may all of our gurus' lives be long and stable, especially that of his holiness Dalai Lama and Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And may may the Dharma flourish, especially all the F50 centers, and within that, Choe Khor Sum Ling, Bangalore, the host of this session tonight. May all of their activities flourish. May the center always have the requisite support in terms of volunteers, staff, and financial support, and so forth. Okay, thank you all. See you next time.